how do you get into flow doing stuff you hate?
What about
Right?
the project for school, right? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to do this. How do I get, you're never going to get into flow if it's something you don't like doing.
When you're doing your work every day, let's say you're now doing this podcast, you're going to do something else, you just had lunch before this, and you're writing, you're doing all this stuff. What would you say it's the sustainable rewards that you have in your work? Is that meaning? Is that excitement? Is that like, what is it, like the short term, right? Immediate feedback loop rewards that you have in your work now that are driving you?
There's a chapter in the book about how to play anything, how we can reimagine the task.
Yeah.
And I overturn a lot of apple carts in this book. And there's a lot of things, I think, pop psychology out there that I'm not a fan of. One of them is this idea of flow. I love, Csikszentmihalyi has this idea of flow. It's very powerful, but I haven't found how to, in the book, and I'm a big fan of his work. It's wonderful. I buy every book he ever writes.
Yep.
But he talks about how flow is this wonderful, magical state, but he only gives examples of people doing things they love, right? Like the basketball player and the surfer and the person who just loves doing that thing. How do you get into flow doing stuff you hate?
What about the project for school, right? Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to do this. How do I get, you're never going to get into flow if it's something you don't like doing.
Yeah.
And so I went to see someone else. I went to see Ian Bogost, who's a professor at Georgia Tech. And he has this philosophy called play anything. And he teaches through, I write about his research about how he says the way you learn to play a task is to not expect yourself to enjoy it. Right? And now how can that be? How can play not involve enjoyment? He says the point of play is not to have fun. The point of play is to occupy your mind and attention long enough to get through the task. So he says the way to do it is not by pouring a spoonful of sugar, right? The Mary Poppins method of, if I just have a reward at the end, that's going to make me want to do it. It turns out that those type of extrinsic rewards can decrease creativity. They can actually decrease motivation. So it's fine if it's something you have to do very, very rarely. But if it's a task you have to do more than once, it behooves you to learn these tactics to learn how to play the task as opposed to just having an extrinsic reward. And he says the way to do this is kind of counterintuitive. He says what you want to do is to focus more intently on the task and find the variability in that task, in that behavior. So he gives the example of how he used to hate cutting his grass. He hated it. And so what did he do? He didn't say, if I cut the grass, I'll give myself a beer, right? Instead, he said, I'm going to learn more about grass. I want to know all the different types of grass, what grows best in my area. And then he looked for the variability. He said, how quickly can I cut the grass? What's the most efficient pattern to cutting the grass? And he trained himself to turn those experiences into play. I did something similar with running. I hated physical exercise my entire life until I learned how to play this behavior of learning to run. I explored it more intensely. I got super into it. Even though I hated it, I got more intensely into that behavior. And then I looked for the variability. When I first started running, I would focus on the feeling, the sensation of wind in my hair. Stupid, doesn't really matter. But the point was I focused more intently on the variability of the experience. And that taught me to learn how to play that behavior. And so that's one of the tactics we can use for tasks that we don't really like to do that can help ease those internal triggers, right? By getting rid of some of that discomfort by dealing with it in a healthier manner.